Fischer, and my research is on the impact of soil carbon storage in southeastern Arizona. So you may be wondering why I chose a research project on soils. I mean, how exciting do you guys find soils? Huh? Huh? Yeah, I didn't really find soils very interesting either. That is, until I participated in a research experience for undergraduates, RU program for short, which is funded by the US government to encourage research in the STEM fields. This project took place in the summer of 2017 in Tucson, Arizona. And Tucson is this city in the state of Arizona, and it's right near the Mexican border. So it's a desert environment, and it's very hot and dry. The goal of my experiment was to determine if these calcium carbonate-enriched soils, which are abundant in this area, if they form from dust or if other factors influence their formation. And calcium carbonate-enriched soils just means that these soils have a lot of calcium in them. Thus, these soils are also known as calcic soils for short. So this was all very interesting, but I had another focus. I wanted to ask if human irrigation impacts the composition of these calcic soils in the area. I thought this was an important question to ask because although irrigation has only been occurring for a short amount of time in the area, a little over 100 years, it has a drastic impact on the surrounding landscape, as you can see with these photos. So in 1891, the first building of the University of Arizona, Old Main, was built, and you can see the natural desert fauna and flora in the picture and a lack of population. But when you fast forward to today, you can see that there was an increase in population. So you need a lot more irrigation to sustain these communities. And that means watering crops and lawns. And so the University of Arizona's first building, Old Main, still remains there today, but today it's surrounded by a lush green lawn. So this has been very beneficial for humans, but it may also have a negative impact as well. This is because these soils have remained the same throughout these 100 years. And these soils have a lot of calcium and carbon in them, as seen with the chemical formula. In fact, these soils are among the largest carbon sinks on Earth after oceans and fossil fuels. So it's important to know what happens when these soils are watered or irrigated. So studies I have found have shown that when you start adding a lot of water into these soils, they begin to change in their chemical composition. They begin to lose their calcium and their carbon that they hold, and studies have shown that they begin to release their carbon as CO2 into the atmosphere, and this could cause a larger climate warming effect. So I was curious to see if this was actually happening here in Tucson, Arizona, that when you start watering these soils, they release their carbon as CO2 into the atmosphere. So for my project, I collected all the soils I used, and this meant collecting soils in the summer in 40 degrees Celsius or 115 degree Fahrenheit weather. So it was very hard work. But once I collected the soils, I sieved them. And that means separating the rock material from the soil material so that I could just only look at the soil material using X-ray fluorescence, or XRF, and determine the composition of these soils. I looked at 5 different types of non-irrigated soils from 4 different types of rock that they formed on. This isn't very important, but they're just different types of soils I looked at. For the soils, I looked primarily at the top layer of soil, which is called the A horizon. And this is the layer I looked at because this is where irrigation is really going to impact the soil. Then I compared the non-irrigated soil to irrigated soil. And I looked at 2 different types of irrigation systems which are found on the University of Arizona campus: drip and sprinkler irrigation systems. Drip irrigation systems use these tiny little pipes to slowly drip water onto the soil. This means they add about 1 gallon or 4 liters of water an hour, compared to sprinkler irrigation systems, which can add 240 gallons or 900 liters of water an hour. So a very big difference. And I was curious to see if this had any impact on the amount of change that these soils face. And once I ran all the analyses, I looked if there was any difference between drip and sprinkler irrigated soils. And to be honest, there wasn't much of a difference. So you could see here, only in aluminum, the drip irrigated soils were slightly different from the sprinkler irrigated soils, with the slight non-overlap of the standard deviations. But they were very similar in all the other elements. So this initially suggested to me that maybe watering soils doesn't have much of an impact on changing the composition of the soil. That is until I looked at and compared the irrigated soils to non-irrigated soils. Then I saw some interesting differences. So from these two plots, you can see that the sprinkler irrigated soils are very different from the non-irrigated soils. But the drip irrigated soils in pink are actually very similar to the non-irrigated soils. So it seems that when you start adding a lot of water to the soils, they begin to change in their composition. And you can see that there's a great decrease in calcium in the irrigated soils compared to the non-irrigated soil. So when you start adding water, they begin to lose their calcium and their carbon content. So why might this difference between drip and sprinkler irrigation systems be occurring? Well, the University of Arizona campus has only been irrigated for about 100 years. And studies like McDonald et al. 1996, among others, have really shown you need greater than 400 years of irrigation or a lot of water to start changing the composition of these soils. And it's just likely these soils haven't been watered for a long enough amount of time for this to occur. So my main conclusions were that the drip irrigated soils were not very different from the non-irrigated soils. But when you start adding a lot of water from sprinkler irrigation systems, so 240 gallons, 900 liters an hour, you start altering their chemical composition. But you really need maybe greater than 400 years to start altering these soils at a significant rate. So why is this important and why should you care? These are actually very good questions. Humans are going to continue living in the southwest of the United States for many years to come and continue irrigating these dry desert soils. This means that these soils will be depleted of their calcium and carbon content. Then, when you start adding onto this the negative effect of climate change from humans, this will cause southwestern monsoons to become even more extreme, as you can see with this plot, with a 300% increase in extreme precipitation events in Tucson and in Arizona in the coming years. So you're really going to shorten this 400-year calcium carbonate removal rate of these soils. Thus, these soils could release their carbon as CO2 into the atmosphere in a much less time span than 400 years. And this could cause a larger climate warming effect in the near future. But we're just going to have to wait and see. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
Hello. My name is Elizabeth CARLEN, and I'm a PhD candidate at Fordham University. And today I'm going to be talking to you about my field of study, which is urban evolution. I'm not going to be presenting specifically on my research today because it's still in very preliminary stages, but I'm happy to talk about it with you at the poster session. So hopefully today I'm going to convince you that my field of study is worth studying and that we should all be concerned about urban evolution and how our cities are influencing the evolution of organisms in our environment. So why study urban evolution? And today I'm really going to tell you stories about people like in this crowd here and cities and how they're influencing animals like these moths. Urban evolution is essential to our understanding of cities. It's fundamental for our understanding of evolutionary theory, and it helps us learn how to reduce human impact. So cities, as you might know, are great for people. Most of us live in cities, most of us enjoy living in cities, and in addition to us all living here, they really concentrate a lot of things. So they increase geographic mobility and access to goods. We have a lot more things because we live in a city. We can get access to these goods. They increase life expectancy. So people that live in cities actually live longer than people in rural settlements. They concentrate education and jobs, and so people that live in cities are more highly educated, as many of us are in PhD and master's programs. And they provide easier access to healthcare than rural settlements. So we really do have access to hospitals that are a lot closer. I think even here there's one right across the street from us. So if we're sick, we really can access this healthcare. So kind of zooming out, I want you to take a look at this world image at night, and this is a composite image. And what I noticed right away is how lit up certain portions of the world are. You can see that North America is extremely well lit, Europe is well lit, and parts of East Asia are just really illuminated at night. And this really reflects the intense urbanization that has happened around the globe. Kind of zooming in a little bit more, you can see where we are in Seoul, and that bright dot is kind of insane. Seoul is very bright at night, and you can see this from satellites really high up in space. And you can see how expansive Seoul is. And it's kind of really starkly contrasted with North Korea. You can see that it really is this peninsula, and that North Korea really doesn't have that development. So zooming to where the daytime in Seoul, you can see this intense urbanization reflected around the city. Some of these images might be familiar to you. So despite the fact that cities are great for people, they cause some problems for other organisms. So they increase environmental toxins. They increase buildings and roads, which are not natural surfaces like grass and trees. They increase air pollution. And they increase habitat fragmentation, which you can kind of see in this lower image, where the green spaces are not connected to one another. And you can imagine that if you're an animal, it might be really difficult to move across a wide road to another green space, to disperse or to find a mate. So I realize that I haven't quite defined what evolution is, and as an evolutionary biologist, this definition is very important. We might think of evolution as change, and many of us use the term evolution to talk about changes in our thoughts, my thoughts evolved. But as an evolutionary biologist, evolution has a very specific definition. So evolution is the change in the frequency of a trait in a population. So that population aspect is really important. Evolution happens at the population level and not at the individual level. I'm going to give you a second to kind of read that and let that sink in. So evolution can happen in a variety of ways, including natural selection that you might have heard of, sexual selection, artificial selection, how we get many of our foods, how we get dogs, and genetic drift. And today I'm going to focus on two of these that are very important for urban evolution. And those are natural selection and genetic drift. I'm going to walk you through each of these. So natural selection is most familiar to us, that Darwin kind of introduced us to this. And as an evolutionary biologist, we define it as natural selection is evolution due to the selection of organisms with specific advantageous traits, also known as adaptation. And you might be able to see there are two types of beetles in this gray box up here. We have the black beetles that really stand out, and gray beetles that kind of blend in. And if we have a predator that comes along, they can see those black beetles, and they're going to start to consume those first because they really stand out. And eventually, we're going to get to a population of all gray beetles. So this is a change in that population and the change in the frequency of that trait, the trait being color. So this has happened in real life with the peppered moth example. And some of you might be familiar with this. So these peppered moths are found in the United Kingdom, in the UK, and before industrialization occurred, the light-colored moths were in very high frequency, and the dark-colored moths were less frequent. And this is because these moths blended into their trees. So I want you to take a second and see if you can determine where the moths are on this image. Yeah. So you might see that black one right there. This is the light-colored one that really blends in. And you can imagine if you're a predator, you're going to eat the black ones because you can find them, and you're going to spend a lot more time working for those light-colored ones because they're so much harder to see. So then industrialization happened, and we started burning coal like crazy, and that coal started to get on to the trees and change the color of the bark. And so now you have these moths, and I'm going to give you a second to try to find them. So now this light one is really standing out right here, and this black one right here, I don't know if you can see that, is blending in. So now you're getting an increase, drastic increase in the black-colored moths, and the white ones, the light-colored ones, are being picked off like crazy. And this is, again, a change in the frequency of this trait, and that is evolution. Luckily, we cleaned up our act. We realized that this air pollution was really bad for us, and so we instituted regulations that really stopped these power plants and these factories from burning coal, and we went back to this original state where now the light-colored moths are at a much higher frequency, and the dark-colored moths are decreasing again. Once again, evolution. So that might be most familiar, and we're going to talk next about genetic drift, which is a little bit less familiar to a lot of us. So genetic drift is evolution due to the random sampling of organisms. So evolution can occur just based on randomness. So again, we have our beetles sitting here in this gray box, and we have the two different colors once again. But this time, a wall is built, and it crushes one of the beetles or two of the beetles, and then it also separates these populations, and these populations are no longer able to breed or interact with each other. And that causes these two populations to diverge and evolve. And it's completely due to randomness. It's not due to selection. It's just a barrier comes in and prevents these these populations from breeding. So this has also happened in real life, and this work that I'm going to show you is actually my advisor's work and is the reason why I became interested in working with him. So this is New York City, where I live, in 1609. So you can see that it's green everywhere. And at this time, there is these native mice that lived in this area, and they lived everywhere. They lived everywhere they possibly could in all this green space. These are not the house mice that you're used to. These are actually native mice to New York City and the surrounding areas. So this is what New York City looks like today, and you can see this drastic shift in buildings. So what's happening now is these mice are forced into these green spaces, into these parks, and can't leave them. And this is causing evolution. So now we see populations of mice that have evolved, and there's a population here in Queens, right here, there's a population in Central Park, and these populations in New Jersey. And they can no longer breed with one another, and so they have evolved. And this work is really interesting because you can actually take a mouse from any park in this area and sequence and genotype it, and we can tell you what park it's come from. So I hope that today I've convinced you that studying urban evolution is essential to our understanding of the urbanized world. It improves our understanding of evolutionary theory and will help us learn about how humans are impacting wildlife. And thank you, and I'm happy to tell you about my research with pigeons at a later date.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the atmospheric pollution issue in Korea, especially about the organic nitrogens. Here is my contents. At first, we're going to introduce the air pollution issue in Korea nowadays, and organic nitrogen in the atmospheres, what I'm studying now, and what is the implications of my study to reduce the atmospheric pollutions. As you can see on the screens, we Korea have very concerns about the atmospheric pollution nowadays, because so almost every day we can watch the breaking news about the concentrations of the fine particulate matter in the ambient atmospheres. So we have to solve this problem in somehow, and that's what I'm working on. So as you can see, we Koreans are really concerning about the atmospheric pollution nowadays. So almost everyone wear the mask. If the governments alert us, today will be high concentration of the fine particulate matters in the atmospheres. And sometimes students don't need to go university or school if the level of the fine particulate matter is too high. And this is somehow silly, but we can have these special signs in Namsan Tower where we visited last week. If we have the clear sky, we can show the blue light in Namsan Tower. And if it is really worse, we can see this red line in Namsan Towers. So, however, the concentration of the fine particulate matters in Korea is gradually decreases since 2002. So it's not a matter of today, but we realize the air pollution is important to our health. That's why we are concerning too much. And the other reason is about the forecasting of the governments. Since 2014, Korean governments alert the people we have high concentration level or tomorrow will be okay. So people realize how atmospheric pollution is important. So that's the reason why we are concerning about the PM10s, which is particulate matter with the diameters less than 10 micrometers. But we Korea still have higher concentration compared to the other big cities like Tokyo, Paris, and Washington, D.C. But we have still a little hope because Washington, D.C. In one day have very higher concentration of fine particulate matter. So we can learn about the strategy to reduce the case of the United States. The fine particulate matter can be produced by these simple mechanisms. Fine particulate matters can be emitted from the primary emission source, and then that can be transported from the outside. So in nowadays, we are really concerning about the transportations of the fine particulate matters from China, actually. So we need to negotiate to the China governments of China. And fine particulate matters can be produced via the chemical reactions in the ambient atmospheres by the sunlight, and it can be removed also from the sunlight, and wet depositions and dry depositions. So it's very important to understand the emission source and the characteristic of the chemical reaction in the ambient atmospheres. So from now on, we are mainly working on organic C, for example, alkanes, polyaromatic, what was that? PAH, aromatic hydrocarbons, and sugars, etc. But I think we need to expand our understanding to the organic ends, because many organisms are composed by the organic and nitrogens, and that can be produced from the many emission sources. As you can see, organic nitrogens have very specific primary emission sources like bakery exhaust, tobacco smoke, and other fossil fuel combustions. So we need to figure out the primary emission source of organic ends combining with the organic carbons, so we can have a clear idea about the primary emission source of the fine particulate matters in the atmospheres. And they can be also produced from the dark formations and photochemical reactions, and they can also removed by the photochemical photolysis. So organic nitrogen have very specific characteristic of the chemical reaction in the atmospheres. And organic nitrogens are mostly toxic, so we need to have the knowledge about the organic ends in the ambient atmospheres. That's my idea. So here comes very last slide. I insist that we have to know about the organic nitrogen in the ambient atmospheres to understand the production mechanisms or the primary emission source of the fine particulate matters. And that can be, that can contribute to the making of the reducing technology or the strategy to reduce the atmospheric pollutions and human impacts to the atmospheres. That's all my presentation.
Good afternoon. My name is Seung Kim, and I'm EWHA Women's University student, PhD candidate. My major is physics, and today I'm going to talk about the first industrial revolution is coming now. So this KS mark thing is my initial, KS. This is my content. First, I'm going to introduce previous industrial revolutions, and then we'll mention the baby artificial intelligence, AI. And then after I show you my research briefly, find the link of AI with AI, at last I'll tell you my little opinion. So far, there are 3 steps of development of industrial revolution. First revolution began at the end of 18th century in Britain, based on steam power. Yeah. In these seasons, textile, iron machines, iron machine tools, and transportation were remarkably developed. And the second revolution started between 19th century and 20th centuries. We can find its history in every direction. People created mass production, telecommunication. There is something, here is a telecommunication. Telecommunication and internal combustion engines. And you know the Wells and Edison in this season. And third revolution emerged at the end of the 20th century. It is based on computer and network. So now we are friendly to information technology, colossal calculation, and real-time globalization, and automatic manufacturer. So nowadays, people try to make the realization of AI. So there are a lot of clues of appearance of AI. But I picked up just one example of baby AI because it is the first program which challenges the human brain. So Garry Kasparov here, who is the youngest world chess champion, and Deep Thought here is taken brief by IBM Corporation. Corporation had a chess match at 1989, and score was this one. But IBM team didn't abandon this program and upgraded Deep Thought to the Deep Blue and declared the rematch at 1996 and ended in draw. IBM team maybe really wanted to win Kasparov, so they developed Deep Blue again, and the deeper blue come into the world. So finally, IBM team made a good score at 1997, and then whole world surprised a lot. This was the very first day of defeat of the human race. 20 years later, Deeper Blue's first victory, global attention had been turned again to the biggest Baduk match. Baduk is one of the famous Eastern board games, which is a more difficult challenge than chess for AI due to the different way of thinking. To cut a long story short, Alphago, I heard that this Alphago is just Go, is most friendly for US students, took a resounding victory. This historic event indeed became a wake-up call for the world that the first industrial revolution is coming immediately. So most people who were shocked previous event, they imaged the fearsome AI, such as Skynet of Terminator or Vicky in iRobot. So most nations and world-class organizations have started to compete each other to advance and expand the AI research. On the other hand, several social problems are emerged, such as job losses and decreased career choices and changing values and so on. But in this time, I related to my field. I just focus on the job losses. So this is what I do. I introduce very briefly about this. As I mentioned before, my major is physics, especially condensed matter physics. I deal with insulator samples related to the magnetizations. For understanding my sample, I use laser, polarizer, prism, and CCD, and a lot of super cute opticals here. And if the laser exposed to the sample with 100% energy, almost energy is just reflected from the surface, and very tiny, teeny responses comes out. I distributed this to information, mixture light using prism, and only gather the responses like this from the CCD, and I get this graph. As I analyze this information, I can communicate my samples and finally get their beautiful physical properties. This process I'm doing is named spectroscopy, and I use a visible light source, so it is called Raman Spectroscopy. Raman Spectroscopy is one of the powerful tools to find out the crystal structure of samples and which atoms are in there. We can distinguish the materials and vibration of chemical bonding from Raman spectra. So this charming picture here tells us that Raman spectroscopy is highly sensitive for measuring this kind of molecule and crystal structure behavior, like a symmetry structure, and anti-symmetry structure, and rotation or bending something. Also, we realize that how different is the vibration depending on the temperature, magnetization, and pressure. Look at this very charming graph here. You don't know what it is, and you don't know what it says to you, but you can find out these spectra are changed depending on this temperature, right? Oh, so finally, we can deduce the lots of physical properties from the spectrum of materials. So I can show you some connect with AI and my field. So far, if there is a materials that we already know which composition it has, we want to discover physical properties of this mysterious material. And luckily, we find the physical properties, then we make a database. But we need very high technology and enormous money as well as time to observe the physical properties these days, because we have identified most of the combinations of the substances in the periodic table. Nowadays, a program named Amadeus, I'm not sure this pronunciation is Amadeus or not, has been coded by my friend physical team, tells us what kind of physical properties can be occupied in the material when the user enters the composition to it. However, this is not its real value. It shows its ability when the condition is reversed. It could suggest several configurations when we input specific physical characteristics of materials based on the database within seconds. So if more precise and exact information is offered, it could suggest fewer and more accurate candidates. So it becomes a possible thing for a programming algorithm to infer completely new substances, not only to simple search. However, Amadeus is not a unique program for solid-state physics. There are already dozens of complex algorithms in the world. It seems to be only a matter of time that those programs are developed into artificial intelligence after all. Because they are faster and cheaper, and then people cheaper than human resources, and moreover, they don't say no to their professor or something. What should the researchers do then? So we are very worried about our position, so we lost our jobs, something, because they're too better than us. Frankly speaking, the real face of AI, they cannot doing anything without commanding from creator, and deduce only inside their database. So if there is wrong database, they can give us a result, wrong result. And keywords should be specific. If we use smoky words like that, and they cannot understand, say that again, or what, or today is very bright something. And it is limited to the repeated and relatively simple work yet. So in my opinion, AI needs incredible time, idea, efforts, and money that cannot be calculated to observe our lives completely. So we have to contemplate a way to keep our rights while making full use of these remarkable programs. How about putting artificial intelligence on the 3D works first on behalf of humans? Nearly all people are reluctant to do this work, even though somebody must. People's mind and body are easily vulnerable, although they could not receive such treatment or money. Robots and programs would be willing to take up such roles without any complaint. The remaining workforce should be put into other industries being provided with better education and promoted treatment. Simultaneously, we need to get ready for the coexistence of humans and programs by enhancing our education, philosophy, and our own values related to the merits of humanity. So this is my conclusion. So AI is already permitted in our lives with strong advantages. It could threaten human jobs very soon. We cannot escape the reality that we have to live with AI. The AI will be replaced with workers who engage in 3D works. We should offer them as 3D workers, the better education and promoted treatment. And we focus on the education for our next generation to make them generate self-esteem and deal with AI easily. So thank you for your attention.
All right, so my name is Kathleen Smith, and I actually just graduated from Mount Holyoke College, which is a small women's college in the northeastern United States. So it really is such a pleasure to be here at EWHA Women's University, another institution that really knows the value of education for women. So my work is in modeling, not fashion, but actually in the behavior of technology, specifically photovoltaics. So some of you have had a little preview, but for those of you who haven't, how many people actually think they know what photovoltaics are? Yeah, I see you. So not too many. So does this help? This picture is probably more familiar. This is a conventional silicon solar panel. And solar panels generate electricity in the form of voltage from sunlight, which is phos in ancient Greek. So when you smash those two words together, you get photovoltaics. So silicon solar is a mature technology that is already available on the market. Panels have efficiencies in the lab of around 25%, though that efficiency drops by about 5% when you move to the industrial scale, just due to losses from the fabrication scale in the lab to industry. But that being said, the 20% that we get in industrial panels is still relatively high to make them a very useful technology. And a lot of people have put silicon solar forward really as a potential energy solution to some of the challenges that in air quality that Nare and Liz have already discussed in previous presentations. But I actually don't study these devices, and this is why. So the refinement process for silicon is highly energy intensive. You have to heat the silicon to a really high temperature for a relatively long time. In addition, solar panels are big and heavy, so they're difficult to transport and install in many locations. They're often too heavy to be put on older buildings. So if you want to put solar on an older building, you have to either retrofit it, so put in a lot of internal supports, which is very expensive, or just tear it down and start over, which is also very expensive. So these factors can really slow down solar production and installation. So this plot here actually shows in red historical installation of solar in just the United States. And the dotted line is our total installed capacity. So as we can see, the growth rate in installation begins to turn over around 2022 or 2023 or so. Now this point, way up here, is energy usage in the US in 2007. So there's a clear gap between silicon energy installation and our energy needs, but don't be fooled by this plot because physicists, we like to use logarithmic plots a lot. So this point here is 1,000 gigawatts. That's how much energy we're making. This is 5,000 gigawatts. So our energy needs are 5 times what the projected installation of silicon solar is projected to be. So my work really focuses on how we fill this deficit. So my lab actually looks to organic photovoltaics or organic solar cells. And organic solar cells are made using organic dyes based on the dyes used by plants in photosynthesis, which makes a certain amount of intuitive sense. I mean, plants have been producing food and energy using the sun for thousands upon thousands of years. So why shouldn't we try to imitate this just naturally successful process? So organic photovoltaics are both lightweight and can be flexible, which leads to a lot of potential creative installation solutions. So I'll give you a sort of example. So you have your laptop, you want to get some work done, it's a lovely sunny day in the park. But your laptop battery only has, what, an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on your laptop. So instead, you can go sit in the park and unroll a very thin just sheet of plastic that has these flexible solar cells in it. And you can work as long as you like, your laptop is constantly recharging. And when you're done, you fold up your little square of plastic, tuck it in your backpack, and you're on the subway home. So that's really the dream with this technology. However, at this point, the efficiency of the lab of organic solar is only at its very highest, 20%, and that's only 1 or 2 incidents. So assuming similar industrial losses, that's an industrial efficiency of around 15. And that 5% difference at its smallest, it could be even higher, is actually a lot of energy. So that is a big deal. So my work is really in trying to close that gap in order to make organic solar viable. So part of that is really developing a model for how solar cells work. So one of the things that has been assumed is that we can use the same model for silicon solar panels and organic solar cells. The model for silicon is fairly well studied and well established at this point. So, I mean, they're both solar cells. They both generate electricity from sunlight. They're both semiconductor devices. They both use heterojunctions. I'm using the same vocabulary here is the point. So, same words, same physics, same model. So these plots just show datasets taken from 5 different organic solar cells, so that's the colored dots. And the white lines are fits of that data using the silicon exponential model. So the model works great in a very small range. Now, I will say that range, known as the turn-on voltage in semiconductor devices, is very important, but we're not capturing the whole story at all with this model, which is really concerning because if we're only fitting 10 data points out of 100, how can we really be sure that that model is encompassing any, or let alone all of the physics? So we decided, okay, let's just scrap that model, start over, basically from the ground up back to basics. How does charge move through a solar cell? What steps does it have to go through? And how do we generate current from there? So I'm not actually going to go into how we developed that model in this talk because that would take about half an hour from experience of defending my undergraduate thesis. So instead, I'll just show you the results. So the white dots are, again, the same data sets. And the lines that are in color are our fits. So we're fitting the basically full range of the data exactly. And so, of course, we took a little bit of a closer look. So this is just one of our data sets. And the 2 regions, those very small boxes that I've zoomed in on, are regions that are very traditionally hard to fit because the shape of the graph is changing so suddenly. So it goes from flat to pretty steep, and then from steep back to a rounded out curve. But even there, we can see that we have pretty much almost an exact fit. This point here is actually the worst fit in the entire data set, we checked, which is really exciting. And we've already begun to play with this model and see if it's useful. So this is just results from a very preliminary study. So we used our model to extract various parameters that tell us how well our solar cell is working. And we compared them to various material properties that are easily measurable in the materials that we use to make our solar cells. And we found a linear relationship between one of the parameters of cell function and a very easily measurable material property, which is really exciting for potential collaborations with other physicists or chemical engineers and materials scientists in order to develop better screening processes for materials for solar cells. And this is really just the tip of the iceberg. We've barely scratched the surface on this model. We still hope to examine both the potential of this model to be used as a diagnostic tool for figuring out where the efficiency shortfalls are occurring in our devices, and also as a springboard to understand the fundamental physics that governs these devices. But we are hopeful that we will continue in the trend of history, which has shown that improvements in quantitative modeling lead to rapid advances in technology. And it's really from this collaboration, this cycle of fundamental theory, experiment, and modeling that really feeds the technology of tomorrow and will hopefully bring us to cleaner energy across the world. And I'd just like to thank, at this point, my advisor and all my lab mates, and of course the EWHA-LUCE Foundation and EWHA Women's University for hosting this program.